I used to be an assistant scoutmaster for the Lightning Patrol, well, the Cobra Patrol, which became the Lightning Patrol for Troop 283. And my son Grady is a member of the Lightning Patrol. He's a Life Scout working towards Eagle. And I've had the pleasure of my time with scouting, getting to join him to 3 of the National High Adventures, to this past summer to Philmont, prior to that to Sea Base, and also up to Northern Tier 2 times for Ukpik. So I've been to Many Point and many of the camps that you've all been to, and been a part of many of the Merit Badge days around Northern Star Council, including as an instructor for the past 5 years for Toro Merit Badge Day. And I've taught Citizenship in the Nation. I've taught the Legal Merit Badge, the Fingerprinting Merit Badge, and then a whole host of other merit badges outside of Toro, including snow sports, horsemanship, and scouting heritage. So done a few of these. I've never done one online, so thanks for signing in. We're in different times these days, and so it's awesome that you all, as students who are used to all this technology, can allow us to give instruction this way. So thanks for being brave enough to sign up for this class and try this out online, even although this is only our 2nd week of doing this. So I teach the Citizenship in the Nation Merit Badge because I'm an attorney, and this is a lot of stuff that I learned in law school, particularly in constitutional law. And so feel somewhat qualified to teach this to you guys. It should, in most parts, be similar to stuff that you've covered in civics classes or social studies classes in middle school and or high school. I would expect that most of you have covered at least a fair amount of this, but maybe some of it will be new, or maybe me teaching it will give you a different perspective on it. And then just a little bit more background. I have been practicing as an attorney for a little over 10 years, and or actually almost 12 years now. And I'm presently a regulatory compliance attorney for the Toro Company. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Toro, we're the company that makes the red lawnmowers and snow throwers that hopefully your parents have in your garage. In that role as a regulatory compliance attorney, I just make sure that the products that Toro sells around the world comply with all of the laws and regulations that apply to them. You wouldn't think that there's a lot of laws that relate to products, but there really are, and they're intended mostly to keep our customers safe, and the people who are around our customers using the product, keeping them safe as well, and also making sure that we're good stewards of the environment, that our products are sustainable, that they don't use any bad chemicals, that the engines that power them don't emit above the limits that they're allowed to emit for emissions, the greenhouse gases. So I spend a lot of my time just making sure that our products are both sustainable and safe for our customers. So with that, I will get started. As Brett said, well, I don't think he maybe introduced himself. He's the outdoor chair for Troop 283. And he will be monitoring this session today and also recording it so that future people can listen to it. But if you have questions throughout, he said, raise your hand and we will stop as we go along. Okay, we'll jump right in. So Citizenship in the Nation. It's an Eagle required merit badge. So congratulations if this is your first Eagle merit badge that you've taken, or Eagle required merit badge. But even more congratulations if this is getting you closer and closer to getting Eagle. Okay. Now I'm moving around this. Hold on just a second. There we go. So this is going to be participatory. So I'm going to ask the question now: what does citizenship in the nation mean to you? And I'll kind of unmute you one at a time, or I'll ask Brett. I'll call out the names, and maybe Brett will unmute you one at a time. But Allison, if you'd go first and first of all introduce yourself and then answer.
Hi, I'm Allison. Um, I'm from the same troop as Anna Park, Troop 283 Girls, and citizenship in the nation. Well, I took it very literally and said that a citizen is somebody who is granted the rights by its government and government after immigrating there, and basically citizenship in the nation is well everybody being able to be there legally.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. Anna, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Anna. I said being a citizen in the U.S. means you get certain rights, duties, and obligations.
Perfect. And we're going to talk about those in just a few minutes. So thank you, Anna. Welcome. Joe, do you want to go next?
Joe and Rukshan are both without mics, so while they type theirs, why don't we go ahead and have Marnie go?
Sure. Okay. And Joe and Rukshan, if you would, type yours in the chat, and Brett will read those for us.
All right, so Joe wrote, it means to be a citizen in a nation and also to do your duties to your country.
So Marnie is, we'll let Marnie's actually representing, is Reed Helgerson. Marnie is a coworker of mine, and her son Reed is signed up for the merit badge.
Hi, I'm Reed. I'm from Troop 232. So what I said was follow and respect all the rights and laws and live by them.
Okay, and Rukshan wrote, being a citizen and either getting naturalized or born in the U.S.
Okay, perfect. So what does it take to be a good citizen of the United States? We'll kind of go Rukshan and Joe, if you want to start writing what it takes to be a good citizen, then we'll go in reverse and we'll ask Reed to start, and then we'll go to Anna and then to Allison.
I said to follow laws, be nice to everyone, and respect the religions and the laws.
Perfect. Anna, you want to go next?
I put respecting others' rights.
And Allison.
I put following laws and adhering to the duties and obligations of a citizen.
Guess we better get to this duties and obligations thing soon.
Rukshan wrote, voting, paying taxes, respect the rights of others, stay informed about what is happening in the country. And Joseph wrote, it takes following the laws and to participate in the community.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. So, what are some of the rights, duties, and obligations? We'll start with rights. I don't know. Do you have the ability to unmute all, Brett? Maybe we could just have.
Yes, I do.
Say out some of the things I can kind of track who's participating.
Okay, everybody's unmuted.
Yep. So Joe and Rukshan, if you would type your stuff. So what are some of the rights that we have as citizens of the United States?
Freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Okay.
Freedom of happiness and freedom of press.
I have more I could say, but I want to give everybody else a chance.
Go ahead, Anna. Do you have any? What are some rights?
The right to bear arms.
Right to bear arms. Okay. Allison,
Right to petition, right to a trial, the right to assemble. And
how about Joe and Rukshan?
Rukshan just wrote, freedom to express yourself, freedom to worship, right to a fast and fair trial by jury, run for elected office.
oh, yeah, that one too.
Joseph added, we have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution.
Okay. So we'll talk about the Bill of Rights. Well, we'll talk about both, actually. Okay, so what are some of the duties of a citizen? First of all, does anybody know what the difference is between a duty and an obligation?
I had a hard time figuring that out, but I don't really know.
You're not the only one. It's tough.
A duty isn't required.
That's right. That's the biggest difference.
Oh yeah.
It's not legally required, but it might feel, in most cases, it's morally required. It's kind of the right thing to do as a human being. And if you follow a particular religion, you might feel that it's morally or religiously required of you. But technically speaking, from a legal perspective, it's not. You can't go to jail for it, or so. Okay. So, what are some duties and obligations? well, start with duties. So the things that you should do might feel like you have to do, but technically speaking, you don't have to do them.
Voting.
Voting's a good one.
Being a good citizen.
Yep.
Respecting the rights and opinions of other people.
Yeah, and that's one, Allison, that could, particularly respecting the opinions of others falls into the duties thing. Something you should do. Respecting the rights in some cases. There are laws that protect the rights of others, so you could.
Yeah, I kind of just grouped them all together.
Yeah. Okay. But no, you're right. I mean, that's kind of that gray area too, though.
Yeah.
Rukshan added support and defend the Constitution, respect and obey laws.
How about you, Reed? What do you think are some duties?
Be respect local and state laws, respect rights and religions, and respect beliefs.
Okay. Did Joe write anything?
Joe just wrote, you should vote and respect others.
Okay. Okay. Obligations. What are some examples of obligations?
Paying taxes.
Paying taxes?
Serve jury duty.
Following the law.
Okay, following the law.
Serve in jury.
Defend the country.
Yep. So does anybody for the well, right now sitting here today, the males of this country have to do something that the females don't do. That could change in the future. Does anybody?
Yeah.
Selective service.
What's that?
That was selective service.
Yes. Anybody have thoughts on that? The fact that right now today, 18-year-old males have to register for the draft or selective service, but 18-year-old females do not. There's been a lot of talk about it, and the Supreme Court might have to decide that. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that.
Well, I think that's kind of dated, honestly, that only men have to do it, because the last time that it was men being drafted was like World War II or whatever. Whatever war was most recent.
Vietnam, I think, is the last time they've.
Was it Vietnam or Korea?
Yes, Vietnam was the last time that we had an active draft.
Any others? Anybody type anything in? Rukshan or Joe, you got any thoughts on the fact that when you get to be 18, you have to register for a draft, but right now today, your classmates Anna and Allison would not have to?
I think women should be able to, because some women can be stronger than men. So.
Okay. I'm going to move ahead a slide here.
Joseph just added, I think all should sign up for it.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. So we've covered these. So we talked about the rights. Where are those rights found?
The Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights. Anybody else think those rights are found anywhere else besides the Bill of Rights?
In like our own moral compass.
Anna or Reed?
Are they in the Constitution, maybe?
Yep. The Bill of Rights is part of the Constitution, and there's some rights that are found. The Bill of Rights were when we got around well, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it was a more general document, and then after they wrote it, put it out there for everybody just to ratify, all the states, then people started looking at it and they're like, oh, we forgot some stuff and we weren't very specific. So that's when they started writing down the Bill of Rights. This is what we really mean. So, okay, some examples. We talked about that. What are the duties of a responsible citizen? We talked about those. What do people think today about duties and obligations, with everything that's been going on in the last, particularly the last week, but the last several weeks in the U.S. with coronavirus, COVID-19. What do you think are some new obligations and duties that you all of a sudden realize that as an American citizen or a citizen of any country that's been locked down, but talking about the U.S., what are some of those obligations and duties
You're you're obligated to like stay at home as much as you can to like flatten the curve or whatever it is.
If you're sick, get quarantined and don't leave. That's probably an obligation.
Well, it's certainly going to become an obligation. I mean, our governor yesterday was considering joining California and New York and Illinois and a few other states that have actually made it a law that you have to stay home unless you're going to get food or have a reason. We were talking to our nieces who live in Barcelona, Spain on Thursday night, and they're locked in their houses. I mean, they can't leave.
Yeah.
They go out on the streets, they can get a fine if they can't prove that they're going to get food. So I would expect that in the coming week that might happen in Minnesota, at least for a short period of time. And so that will certainly be an obligation. Talking about duties is something that we should do, but maybe aren't required to do. What would be a duty in these days with coronavirus? Anna, what do you think would be a duty?
Washing hands a lot and social distancing.
Yeah, perfect examples. Rukshan or Joe, do you have anything that you want to type in?
I think they did.
They did.
Rickshaw says wash your hands a lot.
Joe said we should practice social distancing and go into quarantine if you or someone staying at your house has been out of the country recently.
Perfect. Thanks for reading those. Okay. I see the chat window now. I think I minimize it. There we go. Okay. I'm going to put this over on the side so I can follow it too. Do you guys see my chat window, or do you only see the, if I put them on my screen, do you only see the PowerPoint?
They only see the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, so Declaration of Independence. Who can tell me what that is?
It's when we said goodbye to Britain because we didn't want to deal with them anymore and we became our own country.
Who signed the Declaration of Independence?
Our founding fathers.
John Hancock.
A lot of people.
A lot of people. Yep. Those are all right answers.
I feel like George Washington did too, but I'm not sure.
Actually, I can't. Did George Washington sign it? You know, Brett?
I don't believe he did.
Okay.
Most of the states did, I think.
Definitely John Hancock,
I think
though.
all of them, maybe one didn't.
Well, they weren't
Definitely.
states at that point.
That's true. What,
They
colonies?
were colonies.
So the Declaration's broken up into a few parts. So the preamble is really the, is an attorney, we call it the whereas clauses, which is, the reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. So I like to give the example of, an effective complaint or an effective document really starts with the reasons why. So if you, as teenagers, have some gripes with your parents, rather than saying, this isn't fair, or why are you picking on me, you should really start with some very specific examples and an explanation of why you're writing what you're writing. So the preamble is the why, and so when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they started with some self-evident, meaning kind of to them obvious, or obvious as being a human, that these are some rights that we all have, and this is the type of government that we should have. So that was included as the preamble to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Then they, like I said, rather than telling your parents if you're complaining about unfair treatment, rather than just telling them it's not fair, you should list some specific complaints. And that's exactly what they did in the Declaration of Independence. In fact, they had 27 specific complaints against King George III. I think the biggest one that they were complaining about and kind of led to the Boston Tea Party. Does anybody know what that one complaint was?
Taxes,
Taxes.
which
Taxes.
is kind of ironic.
Yeah. Taxes without what?
Representation.
There we go. So they weren't so upset about having to pay taxes. They were upset about paying taxes and getting no say in how the country was being run. How they
Taxation without representation.
That's right. So do we have any situations in the United States where there are groups of individuals that pay taxes but don't have a representative?
I don't think so.
What do the others think?
I don't know of one.
Yes. The answer is yes.
There is one
Oh,
for
Ooh.
sure. I'm not sure.
There's actually 5.
Yeah, I think that's what I was about to say. I wasn't sure about the territories, but we have the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., where if you live in the district, the Washington, D.C. is surrounded by Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and those people who probably work in Washington, D.C. Pay taxes based on where they live, and they have representatives and senators. If you live in the District of Columbia proper, it's not actually a state. So it'd be like if we drove into downtown Minneapolis, and downtown Minneapolis wasn't a part of Minnesota, but everybody living in Plymouth and Wayzata and Burnsville and Bloomington and other places, they all were part of the state, and they had state representatives or state senators. They could decide how the laws were written, but people who lived in Minneapolis couldn't. So if you live in the District of Columbia, you pay taxes, but you don't get a representative. And then, as Brett alluded to, you've got the U.S. territories as well. So Puerto Rico, Guam, North Mariano, U.S. Virgin Islands,
American Samoa.
American Samoa. Yeah. So those are all U.S. territories where they pay taxes, but they don't get representation either. So it's kind of hypocritical of us to have left England and then
Hypocrites.
our own country, and we still do that to others.
Hypocrite.
So, and there, some of their specific complaints were here's the things we did to try to avoid this. Or actually after the complaints, they said, here are some of the things that we tried to do to avoid having to leave England, but you didn't pay attention to us or you didn't respect us, so we're out of here. So it was the declaration that the 13 colonies are free from England. Here's just a example. So the preamble, like I said, set out very specific things. One of them was that they were doing this to form a more perfect union. What do you think they mean by a more perfect union?
I think it's the idea that they can always improve.
Yeah. I like that. I like that they say a more perfect, but they didn't say it was perfect, right? How about to establish justice? Somebody else tell me what it means to establish justice.
to not have a king or queen.
Yeah. That's could be too, to have a more just system. I think some of their complaints against England were that people could be locked up too easily, and that it wasn't a just and fair system for all. How about ensured domestic tranquility?
Keeping peace within the country.
What does provide for the common defense mean?
Be prepared to defend the country.
Start our own military. Joe or Rukshan, would you type in what it means to promote the general welfare? Yeah.
Joe just typed in to ensure that all Americans are accounted for, and Rukshan added, it is keeping everyone safe.
Perfect. Okay. And then the last one is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. What do they mean by posterity?
Posterity means future generations.
Yeah. So they weren't just thinking about themselves. They were thinking, hey, we're gonna have kids, and they're gonna have kids, and we're gonna have a whole bunch of generations. So we hope this thing lasts for a long time, and we want to get it right the first time, so that it continues on. Okay, so then, anybody tell me what's the difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution?
The Constitution is set laws in the United States, and the Declaration of Independence just kind of set those rules. The Constitution went more in depth.
Okay. The Declaration was more of a high-level outline for what we're doing, leaving England, and the things that we want to accomplish here in the United States would be different than how it was when we were part of England. The Constitution lays out the rules of our country. That's from Joe. That's some good. So let's jump into the Constitution. I keep having to move my chat thing around. So there's 7 articles. Here we go. We got a chat here.
Rukshan says he wasn't able to write down all the things from the preamble.
Okay. That's fine. That's a good point to make. When we get to the end of the merit badge, I'll share with you my email and my phone number and mailing address. What I'm going to have is, you probably saw when you registered, I'll have you send your workbooks to me with your blue cards and any of the other pre-requirements, and we'll go over that. So if you weren't able to complete the workbook all the way, take some notes today, spend some time finishing it after the class, and then when you're all complete, you'll mail the workbook and any of the other assignments to me along with your blue card, and I'll sign that and send it back to you. So
I answered some of the questions in the workbook kind of silly because I was in a goofy mood last night. Is that okay?
that's fine.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure.
And I also have a question about the letter.
Yeah.
I didn't get one back.
You don't need to get one back. You just need to show me what you sent.
Oh, okay.
We can't control what you get back, and I will tell you,
That's true.
written letters to our Minnesota representatives and our senators. My previous representative, Eric Paulson, who was a big supporter of Boy Scouts, and we've sent stuff from the troop to all of our representatives and senators. We've always received a response back from former Representative Paulson. We've not always received responses back, particularly from senators. They're just they're a little bit further removed from the local constituents and aren't as quick to reply back. But the representatives, because they represent people living in a specific, like in the case of Eric Paulson, he was representing people living in Plymouth and the outlying areas. They depend on our votes more, so they're pretty responsive.
Yeah.
So back to the Constitution, and we'll go over all those other requirements as we go through. So we have the 7 articles. Article 1 establishes the Congress, and I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly because I'm more concerned with what you guys have to say about the Bill of Rights. But Article 1 established the Congress, and we'll talk about separation of powers a little bit later and what Congress is and what their role is.
Hey Jim.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me or not, but you seem to keep moving away from your microphone, and it gets really quiet sometimes when you're talking.
I'm sorry. Okay. So Article 1 establishes the Congress. Article 2 establishes the executive branch, which is the president and all of the executive agencies, and we'll talk more about that as well. Article 3 establishes the judicial branch and the Supreme Court. So all of the federal courts and the Supreme Court are part of Article 3. Article 4 describes the relationship between the states. That really gets into how the United States is organized, and that we're independent states, but we also have an overarching federal government, and the states are supposed to respect the laws from one state to the other. So, for example, if I'm a resident of Minnesota, when I'm driving in Minnesota, I have to follow the laws of Minnesota for driving a vehicle. But as soon as I drive across the St. Croix River into Wisconsin, even though I'm a citizen of Minnesota, I have to follow the laws of Wisconsin, not the laws of Minnesota. And if I break a law and I drive my car back into Minnesota, I get a speeding ticket when I'm over in Wisconsin, and I don't come back there to go to court for that speeding ticket or any crime I might have committed in Wisconsin. The relationships between the states say that Minnesota will respect Wisconsin's laws, and they'll help them get me back into Wisconsin to face trial in Wisconsin. Article 5 details the procedures for amending the Constitution. The Constitution was intended to be something that's very difficult to change. So we're talking about at the federal level, but at the state level as well. You'll see from time to time there are attempts to change the Constitution of a state. And so the most recent example I can think of in Minnesota was a few years back. There was citizens got to vote on the potential of changing the Constitution in Minnesota to prohibit same-sex marriage. And I remember taking asking my kids before I went and voted, how do you feel about this? Because if I had voted to change the Constitution to say that, that's something that they wouldn't necessarily have to live with for the rest of their lives, but it's something that would be very difficult for them to change if they felt differently about that. So the idea here is it's hard to change the Constitution, and the reason it's hard to change the Constitution is because we don't want things changing from generation to generation easily. So, and there is a process. Each of the states has to ratify a change to the Constitution one at a time, and it requires a 2/3 majority of the states to ratify. Or actually, Brad, do you know if it's 2/3 or 75 3/4?
I believe it's 2/3.
2/3. Okay, so it's a little bit harder than just having a simple majority of 50.1%. You actually have to have 66.7% of the states change it. Then Article 6 said that the Constitution and all subsequent or all future federal laws that were passed would be the supreme law of the land. So if there was a dispute between me living in Minnesota and somebody else living in Wisconsin, because we'd have different state laws that might govern that dispute. In that case, because we couldn't rely on our state laws to resolve it, we'd rely on federal law, and those would outweigh the federal law. Would outweigh the state law. And then Article 7, I mentioned earlier about changing the Constitution. Article 7 actually gets into how that's ratified by the states. Okay, so Bill of Rights, and this is where I really like to hear what the Scouts have to say, because you have very unique perspectives, I think, as younger people on many of these amendments. So, First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Tell me what the First Amendment means to all of you.
I said it prohibits the law that says there's no religion freedom.
We need to respect other people's religion and we can't discriminate against them. Or not religion. Whoops. Wrong thing.
No, you were right, Allison.
I know there's some that get into specifics of that.
It's our freedom to say what we think and how we feel.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Rukshan added, stops people from discriminating people for their religion.
Joe, what do you think?
And Joe just added, we have the right to practice our own beliefs and spread our thoughts without being persecuted.
Okay. Can you guys give me examples of when you might have seen discrimination based on religion or what somebody has said or thinks in your schools or within your troops? Have you seen any of this happening?
At the time when Donald Trump kept calling the coronavirus the China virus.
Okay.
I feel like he was discriminating against people of American Chinese people.
Okay.
I think a lot. It happens a lot in places, but people kind of just tune it out a little bit, just thinking it's not there, even though most people know it's probably everywhere.
Anna, what do you think? Do you see this happening at school or scout troops or any other groups you're part of?
No.
Okay. Joe Rukshan?
Joe added, my school's Catholic and they kind of look down on Protestants.
Thank you, Joe.
And Rukshan says I haven't seen it.
Okay. Good. Glad you haven't. So Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. This is where scouts, I feel, always have an opinion one way or the other. So I would love to hear what each one of you think. We'll start with Reed this time.
What?
What do you think about the Second Amendment, right to bear arms?
So I wrote down the right to bear arms with a permit, but I think people should be able to own firearms, but you know, crack down on it, like say exactly how we can have a fine line between like how we know if they're going to use it for like hunting or self-defense or like bad things. Try to find a way to just keep it on that hunting or self-defense side.
Anna, what do you think?
I put down a very similar answer. I agree. I think we should be able to like own guns, like because people go hunting, but like we need to make sure like people aren't going to be using the guns for like commit crimes and do illegal things.
Okay, Allison. Allison's answering Joe and Rukshan. If you haven't started typing, please start typing what you think. Go ahead, Allison.
Well, it's basically you can keep firearms and defend yourself if you need to in certain states. Like my dad has one that we use to defend the house if somebody would ever break in.
Okay.
Rukshan said it shouldn't be a thing because crazy people can get guns and kill people.
Okay.
And Joseph added, people should be able to own firearms, but we should conduct more extensive background checks and training in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. The only thing I'll add on to this is I've been since I've been teaching this class and hearing the discussion, I'm really amazed and pleased to hear the scouts have such guarded or well thought out opinions, regarding what they think but also the respect that they show others. It's clear that we're all in a time where guns are used both for good and bad, and that people have given this a lot of thought. There's a lot of discussion too around in the media and all the way up at the Supreme Court about what this means. It says the right to keep and bear arms in order to maintain a well-regulated militia. The time that the Second Amendment was added was a time when there was a lot of skepticism about the government, and people weren't sure how this was going to work out, and they wanted to protect their rights. And so they thought they needed to be able to own arms to rise up against the government and overthrow our U.S. government the same way we had split from England. And so, but a lot of the discussion today is, okay, could I as a citizen even own types of guns that would be required to rise up against our government that has tanks and missiles and all kinds of other firepower. So that's what I will add. Third Amendment is no quartering of soldiers. There was a time, believe it or not, that soldiers could just knock on your door and say, "Hey, we're coming in. We're taking over your house because we need to put a place to sleep, some food to eat." Today, when we're hoarding toilet paper and food and everything, we're stocking at our house. Imagine if the military could just show up at your door, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, we're coming in and we're going to sleep here. We're going to use your toilet paper. We're going to eat all your food." So I'll skip to the next one. Fourth Amendment's freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. What does this mean to you?
I said,
Go ahead, Allison. Why don't you start?
Sorry.
That's okay. No,
Police officer can't search you just because he doesn't like your haircut.
Okay, go ahead, Reed.
I said a law that says that the government cannot search your house without a permit.
Okay. Anna?
I think it's our freedom to privacy, and I think it just makes sure that police officers can't look for evidence without, for no reason.
Okay.
You need a warrant.
Rookshawn added, police can't break into your house without a warrant to search your house.
What do you think, Joe?
Joe added, police can't just stop you and pat you down without an explanation.
What does it mean to you when you're at school?
The school can't search your locker for no reason.
They can't, none of the teachers can search you.
You think, Anna?
Yeah, I think it's just our privacy, and they can't go through our things like our backpack and lockers without our permission or probable cause.
So, and Joe and Rookshawn keep typing as I talk, but you guys mentioned things that I had back when I was in middle school and high school years ago. Lockers, backpacks. What are some things you guys have today that I didn't have when I was in middle school and high school that might be,
iPads and computers.
What's that?
Phones.
iPads and computers.
Yeah. And I think Anna said phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Probably some sort of earbuds or AirPods, something like that.
Yeah. Who owns the lockers?
The school?
Cool.
But who owns the iPhone?
We do.
We do.
Yeah. So, well, more importantly for you guys, who owns your iPhones?
Parents.
Parents. So that's one way that schools, if they don't have the right to search your phone, that's one way they might get the information. They might go to mom and dad, right? Hey, we're concerned with some text Allison sent to Anna, or some text that Reed sent to Rookshawn, right? So they might be able to get at it. Those are all good examples. Did we get anything from Sean?
Yes, Joseph, as teachers, has to respect our privacy, and then they just kind of, as you were asking about things to that are different, they mentioned phones and iPads. Rukshan said the school owns the lockers, etc.
Okay. Thanks for participating. Okay. And the Fifth Amendment. There's the iPad example, or the cell phone. I guess it's a cell phone, although it looks like the size of an iPad. Fifth Amendment, right to due process of law. Freedom from self-incrimination and double jeopardy.
Double jeopardy.
So just kind of speak up and tell me what you think any of those things mean.
You can't be tried for the same crime twice.
Okay. That's double jeopardy.
I said it's the right to laws, liberty, and property.
Okay.
Self-incrimination means you can't like confess to a crime if there's no other evidence saying you are a part of it.
Okay. Well, you can. I mean, you can confess whenever you want, Anna. But you don't. You can't be forced to. That's the distinction I would make. They can't force you to confess or say something.
Rukshan added can't be charged twice for the same thing.
Does it seem crazy to you guys that you could go? Somebody could be put on trial for murder, and the jury could find them not guilty, and they could stand up in the courtroom and say, "Ah, you idiots, I did it." They couldn't try him again.
That's funny.
So try to add some little jokes here along the way. Okay, Sixth Amendment, of accused persons' right to a speedy and public trial. What's a speedy trial mean?
You can't be waiting for like years for your trial.
Your trial can't last your lifetime.
I said the rights of accused persons in a criminal case goes faster.
Joe.
Rukshan added quick and fair, and Joe added fast.
Okay. So one of the other things we talked about earlier about coronavirus, and because of the social distancing and some of the lockdowns in some of the states, the courts are closing. So there are a lot of accused criminals sitting in jails right now, waiting for their quote unquote speedy trial, and they can't, for whatever reason, they can't pay the bail that's been set to get them out of jail. So even if they are innocent and are ultimately found to be innocent, they're sitting in jail today waiting for a trial, but the courts are closed. So it's just something else to think about, that everything that's going on really interferes with a lot of things going on in the country. So okay, right of trial by jury in civil cases. So what's the difference between a criminal and a civil case, first of all?
Civil case would be like suing somebody, whereas a criminal case would be like murder.
What might you sue somebody for in a civil case, Anna?
You could sue them for breaking an item or not upholding your rights.
Yep. What do you think, Reed?
So the civil case is the suing part, and like the criminal case is if someone stole something or murdered or broke in or something like that.
Okay.
Basically, a criminal case happens when somebody breaks the law.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the reason that for the Seventh Amendment to it says a right of a trial by jury in civil cases, so you're automatically guaranteed a jury in criminal cases, but this just says too that you can request a to be given a jury in a civil case. So if you're suing somebody for money, breach of contract, or something else, if a business is suing another business, ordinarily a civil case would be decided by one judge. But if you, for whatever reason, you live in an area where you don't like the judges and don't trust the judges, you've got a particular type of case where the judge is not sympathetic to your position, you can always request a jury, and the jury would be peers that live in your community and might feel the way you do, that it's different than the judge. So that's an example of when you might ask for a civil jury. Joe, yeah, go ahead. Brett.
I was gonna say Joe added, for example, divorce for a civil case, and Rukshan said suing someone for copying something that is copyrighted.
Yeah, good examples. This group has come up with the best examples of civil trials of any class I've ever taught. So thank you. So Eighth Amendment's freedom from excessive bail, cruel and unusual punishment. So what's cruel and unusual punishment?
Oh, I got a good example.
Okay.
This was actually showed up in a game that I like to play on my iPad. You can't be arrested for stealing something, and your punishment is to have your hands cut off. That's just bad.
I said excessive bail, fines, and punishment for the bidding.
Rukshan wrote death. That would be cruel and unusual. So like the capital.
I was gonna say Joe added you cannot be charged someone millions of dollars for bail for a petty crime.
That's right. So, any of you guys know what Hammurabi's Code is? Anybody ever read about that or studied it in school?
No, I haven't.
Really?
So that was an ancient code that really tied. I think Allison gave the example of if you steal, you have your if you steal, you have your hands cut off. If you poke somebody's eye out, they poke your eye out. Maybe two. It's kind of the eye for an eye.
Yeah, eye for an eye.
Yeah. So there was Hammurabi had this whole code that was like, it made it easy, right, for punishing people. It's like if you do this, you get this. If you do this, you get this. But it really was an eye for an eye kind of thing. So those are examples of what we would probably consider cruel and unusual punishment. Okay. So Ninth Amendment, I won't have you guys talk about that, but it was basically a catch-all, meaning we've listed these. We've come up with the first 8 amendments, and we've tried to address everything. We know we're not perfect, and we're probably going to forget some things, and times are going to change going forward, because remember the Constitution, actually the Declaration of Independence said we wanted to form a more perfect union, and went on to say for our posterity, meaning future generations. So Ninth Amendment was, hey, there's some other rights of that you have that we're not listing, and unenumerated means we're not going to number them out in the Bill of Rights. So if you can't find if you can't find something you're looking for in the first 8 amendments, you can always rely on the Ninth Amendment to say, but as a human, I have these other rights as well. Ninth Amendment has been used over time to extend the rights that citizens of the United States have. Where are these arrows coming from, Brett?
Not a clue.
Okay. And then the 10th Amendment says that any rights that aren't set forth in the Bill of Rights, they're reserved to the states, meaning the states can include other rights in their constitutions, or the states can pass laws giving people rights. In the Bill of Rights, and also to regulate things and do things that aren't protected by the Bill of Rights. There's actually 27 amendments of the Constitution. Some of them are a little bit out there or bizarre in terms of you probably wouldn't pay much attention to them, but there are some important ones that I think we're all a little bit more familiar with. They're just listed here. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 16th Amendment allowed the federal income tax. So it wasn't until they passed the 16th Amendment that adults had to pay income taxes. The 18th Amendment prohibited alcohol, so-called prohibition. The 21st Amendment actually repealed prohibition several years later. In between there, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, the women's suffrage movement. The 24th Amendment got rid of poll taxes. Does anybody know what poll taxes are?
You'd have to pay to vote.
Yep. Anna, you think it's a good thing we got rid of poll taxes?
Yeah, because it allows everyone to be able to vote.
Okay. And then the 25th Amendment outlines the order of presidential succession, meaning if something were to happen to the president, the vice president would take over, and then there's a whole order of who would take over after that. Did any of you or any of your parents ever watch the show Designated Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland on TV?
We used to.
Okay. So what's the idea behind Designated Survivor?
The president got like one of the governmental buildings, I forgot which one, got bombed with the president in it, and the president died, and then the vice president has to take over. And yeah, it's just been a struggle for him because he's been thrown into a really tough situation. And yeah.
Yeah, you got the first part, but the one who took over wasn't the vice president, because the vice president was actually at the premise of the show. Was the vice president was there.
It was that one person that they designated in a worst case scenario.
Yep. So they hide him out in an undisclosed location, and if everybody else in the order of succession is killed, then this person takes over. And I think he was the Secretary of Interior or something like that. He was a professor that had just been given a secretary position. He had no, in terms of people being prepared to be president, this guy was way down the list of people who was prepared. So anyway, but we've thought about that because things happen, and there's an order by which the president will be succeeded. So anybody have thoughts or anything they want to share about any of the amendments? And I've listed a lot of important ones here on the screen, but if you think of other ones or you want to talk about these ones, what do you think?
For the amendment, the poll taxes, is that the also one where they put black people could vote, but they had to take that test?
That might be. I mean, poll taxes might be both paying to vote, but also having to pass some test to vote. I'm not entirely sure if that covered that or not, Reed.
Okay.
Anything on the chat, Brett?
Joseph just added, when you're talking about designated survivor, everyone dies except the Secretary of Housing.
Secretary of Housing. There we go. Thanks, Joe. So, Secretary of Housing, whose job it is to make sure that there's affordable housing around the United States, and it's probably by training, probably a civil engineer or an architect or an economist. Probably not the skill set we would be looking for when we're electing our president, but nonetheless, this is a guy who became president because he was the designated survivor. Okay, so we've got an election coming up in November, and we know Donald Trump's going to run likely with Joe Mike Pence as his vice president. Joe Biden, who's likely run against him, has already said that he will name a woman as his vice president. So why is it important who we elect as a vice president?
So if anything happens to the president, the vice president will take over, and it would be he or she would be ready to take on the presidential job.
As part of the coronavirus thing, a couple weeks ago, I got an email because I travel to Washington, D.C. a lot, and I ride their metro train, which is their underground train. And I got an email from the Washington Metro saying, the precautions they were taking to keep everything clean. This is before they shut it down, but precautions they were taking to keep everything clean. But one of the things they ask is that if you were over 60 years old, that you not ride the Washington Metro. And this is how a lot of the senators and representatives and other cabinet members get around town to go into meetings and such. So one of the things I found interesting was they said if you're 60 or over, you shouldn't be riding the Metro. But our current president and all of the candidates that were still in the race at that time were older than 60. So like all of our candidates are older than the age that they're telling you not to ride public transportation. So I found that interesting. Maybe we need to find some younger qualified candidates to run for president. So this was the Declaration of Independence. We already talked about this, what these mean. And these are really the 6 functions of the government as spelled out in the Declaration of Independence. Okay. So the branches of the government, and you know what I'm going to do here is give everybody a 10-minute break. Okay, so everybody's back online. We'll get started. All right. Separation of powers with the federal government. So our federal government's organized in 3 branches: the legislative, which is Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate; the executive branch, which is the elected president, as well as all of the cabinet secretaries that the president names, and we'll talk some more about that. And then the judicial branch, which is, at the top level is the United States Supreme Court and the 9 justices that make up the Supreme Court, all of whom are appointed by the president and voted on by the Senate. And then the judicial branch is also made up of all of the lower courts that are underneath it, the federal courts. So we'll talk a little bit about each of them and what separation of powers means for our type of government. Okay, so first, the functions of the federal government. So who can tell me what the functions of the legislative branch are? The Congress.
They're the lawmakers.
Writes up laws and votes on the laws.
Allison?
I'm finding it. Hold on.
Joe and Rukshan, if you type out what you think the functions of the legislative branch are.
Rukshan added they make laws, and Joseph added they're supposed to create the laws to benefit the country.
Okay. Joe?
That was Rukshan and Joe both added.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I missed that. Sorry, Brett.
It's okay.
Okay. Legislative. I've got here. I think I heard they passed the laws. I heard they raised the money. Did anybody say declare war?
I think I said that.
Okay. They coin the money, meaning they authorize the making of money, and they regulate foreign and interstate commerce. Foreign commerce means how we trade with other countries, and interstate commerce means how the stuff we buy moves across state lines. So, for example, Amazon.com, right? So I order stuff here in Minnesota. Amazon fulfills my order by sending me stuff from sellers who might be warehousing their products at a warehouse or a distribution center that's located in Iowa. So as that stuff moves across state lines to get to me, that means that our federal government, via our Congress, is in charge of setting the laws that regulate me being able to get that stuff. So, and in interstate commerce, there's a lot of disputes that come up all the time about whether or not a law one state passes impacts interstate commerce. So a state can't pass a law if it will stop people from being able to get stuff that they're legally obligated or legally authorized to get in their state. So, okay, the executive branch. I'll go back here. I'll you weigh in on what the function of the executive branch is.
All right, I've got a big list here as well. So,
okay, go ahead, Allison.
They passes or vetoes laws, serves as the head of military and commissions military officers, appoints the head of executive offices, appoints ambassadors, and appoints higher-ranking officials, grants pardon for federal crimes, makes treaties, and informs Congress about State of the Union.
Okay. Reed?
I said they are responsible for enforcing laws.
Okay.
Rukshan added enforce laws.
Okay. Anna, what do you think?
Joseph added enforce laws nationwide.
Okay. Anna, is your mic on mute?
I said to make sure everyone follows the laws that Congress has passed.
Okay. So can anybody give me some example of agencies that are part of the executive branch?
The U.S. Postal Service.
Yep.
The military?
Yep. Pentagon.
The president.
What's that? The president? Well, the president. Yep. The president is the executive branch. So there's a lot of agencies. So the president.
Joseph added police, military, and the president, and Rukshan said police.
Okay. So the police at the federal level would be like the FBI. I guess you could have the Department of Homeland Security, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the agencies that really enforce the criminal laws. But we've got a lot of other agencies. Does anybody know who enforces the environmental laws? So the laws about our safe drinking water, our safe air quality, protecting birds and bees and butterflies. Anybody know who does that? So that would be the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. So they're the ones tasked with making sure that the water that comes out of the tap at your home doesn't have lead in it, or that the air we breathe is clean. So they regulate the emissions from vehicles, and I work for Toro, so they regulate the emissions from the lawnmowers that we make, so that the smoke that comes out of the tailpipe on a car isn't black like it might have used to be. So
Joseph, when you asked that question, had answered the DNR.
Okay, yep. So at the state level, it would be the Department of Natural Resources, correct? And at the federal level, that would be, well, there is a Department of Natural Resources at the federal level as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. So, but there's other agencies. There's the Department of Commerce that regulates how things are bought and sold in the United States. There's the Department of Labor that enforces the laws about treating employees fairly. There's some lesser known agencies. One that I deal with quite frequently is the Consumer Product Safety Council. So they're responsible for making sure that the vacuums and toasters and microwave ovens you use at your home are safe, that they enforce like refrigerators. Refrigerators used to be built such that if there was an old refrigerator stored in somebody's garage or barn, or out thrown away outside, kids could climb into it and shut another. One kid might lock another kid in it, and there was deaths because people were stuck inside refrigerators. So they made sure that the refrigerators in your home, if somebody crawled into one of them, you could push it open from the inside. They regulate the safety of your washing machine, so that when you open the door of your washing machine, the washing machine stops spinning, because there were deaths and injuries associated with that. And I deal with them because they regulate lawnmowers. They make sure that you can't get your foot underneath a lawnmower when it's running, or the warning labels that we have to put on lawnmowers or snow throwers to make sure that people don't put their hands or feet where they shouldn't be. So that's an agency that many people haven't heard of, but if somebody knows that a product that people are buying are unsafe, they report it to the CPSC, and the CPSC will issue recalls saying that all those, if a company made those and they're unsafe, they actually have to buy them back, or they have to send out a replacement part or repair it, have it brought back into the store where you bought it, or to the dealer that you bought it from, and fix it so that it is safe. So, the idea there is just that there's a lot of things that the executive branch does to protect the citizens of the United States. And then the last one's the judicial branch. What's the function of the judicial branch?
They interpret the laws and the Constitution.
Yep. Good answer, Anna.
To
What were you going to say?
to interpret the Constitution and limits the other branch's power.
Okay.
Joe added to interpret the laws passed.
Okay. What they mean? Laws get written by lawyers and politicians who don't always choose the right words or put the commas in the right places. So when you guys as students are taking English and learning grammar, know that some of the stuff that doesn't seem important to you today, in terms of where do you put the comma, how do you separate the nouns from the verbs, if you use one word but you meant, because you can't remember the word you're thinking of, you use a different word, that can sometimes lead to laws that are written that are not clear. And so the judicial branch gets to interpret what they think Congress meant. And the way Mr. Batts is recording this merit badge class today, similarly, when laws are being discussed at Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, they often record those debates on the floor of the Senate or the House of Representatives, and they also they take minutes or document what was said and discussed it when those laws were being considered. And so the judges, they're interpreting those laws, will often look to what was said and what was discussed when that law was being considered and passed to interpret what the words mean if they weren't clear. So that's it's called the legislative history behind all laws. So a lot of things that the Supreme Court and the other federal courts consider is what was the legislative history and why were they trying to write the law and what issue were they trying to address.
And Rukshan added interpret and apply laws.
Yep. So that's a big one, is the applying the laws. Somebody breaks the law, somebody breaks a contract, the judicial branch gets to decide what's the outcome. So like I said earlier, the Supreme Court is at the top. They have the final say. So whatever the Supreme Court says about a law is final, cannot be changed, unless the Supreme Court in a later case, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, in some cases 100 years down the road, reconsiders what they had said before and says, we got it wrong. And that has happened. There's a lot of cases, you'll study in high school, Brown versus Board of Education, Plessy versus Ferguson, some other important decisions from the Supreme Court where they got it wrong the first time, or they the current makeup of the Supreme Court at that time was viewed things one way, but a future Supreme Court with new justices considered things differently, either because they viewed it differently, or because times in the United States had changed and they thought it was time to change the law and interpret it a different way. There was a time they were called the Jim Crow laws. There were a bunch of there were some laws and some interpretations that were very discriminatory to African Americans. And as you study those, you'll learn that was a time in our country's history that we were very discriminatory to African Americans, and then later on, those laws were reviewed and found unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court, the top court, has the final say. There's also district courts. So there's a bunch of different districts, federal districts around the country. We are part of the 8th district here in Minnesota. So our federal district courts, whatever they decide is the law for, is how the law will be interpreted for the 8th Circuit, which includes North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and I believe Wisconsin. Unless the Supreme Court, usually what will happen is there'll be a disagreement between like the 8th Circuit here in Minnesota and the other states I named, and the 9th Circuit, which is California, Nevada, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and Hawaii. If the 9th Circuit interprets the law one way and the 8th Circuit interprets the law a different way, then the Supreme Court gets to decide, because what they're looking for is to make sure that the law is interpreted and applied equally to all citizens in the United States. So anytime two district courts disagree, then the Supreme Court will agree to consider the case and interpret it in a way that applies equally to anybody in the United States, regardless of which state or which district they're in. So, then there's the courts of appeals. And actually, the courts of appeals are the ones that are organized by district. So I'm going to back up. The district court, there's a federal district court for Minnesota, and they interpret the federal law for Minnesota. The Court of Appeals is by district. So Minnesota is part of the 8th Circuit, like I said, and the other states that make up the 8th Circuit, they have one Court of Appeals. And so Minnesota interprets it one way and North Dakota interprets it a different way. Then the Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit will hear that case, and they'll decide what it's going to be for all the states that make up the 8th Circuit. And then if the 9th Circuit out in California and the West Coast, if they decide it differently, then the Supreme Court will hear it and decide for everybody. So sorry, I confused that at first. And then there's special courts. There's a federal bankruptcy court. There's a federal tax court. And before my time as an attorney at Toro, I actually worked as an attorney for the IRS. They're the ones who collect the taxes. And so as an attorney for the IRS, I was always going to the tax court with disputes between the IRS and the taxpayer. And the United States tax court judges were the ones who got to decide those cases, either for the IRS or for the taxpayer. There's a special court, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Commission or court is they decide if somebody invents a product and gets it patented and has the right to sell that and use that name or image for a product. If somebody else comes along and steals their idea and tries to make money off of somebody else's good idea, then those cases get decided by the patent court. So, and then the military has its own courts for crimes involving military members that are committed on a military base or during wartime. And so that's just examples of some of the special courts that exist as well. Okay, so we talked earlier about being, the rights or the duties and obligations of a citizen. So how are some ways that citizens can get involved either at the legislative, the executive, or the judicial branch? Allison, you want to start there with citizen involvement?
Oh, yeah, citizen involvement. Okay, all right. Sorry, I was sidetracked. Okay. For which branch?
You can talk about any of them you want.
Okay, here, let me just fully
give an example for each, maybe.
Okay, so
go ahead, Brett.
I
was going to say, while she's getting organized real quick, Rukshan wrote citizens vote for president and vice president.
Okay, so that's a way to get involved at the executive level.
Citizens vote for senators and representatives for the legislative branch.
Okay.
Joseph added, citizens have the right to perform a citizen arrest. And Rukshan added, citizens can suggest laws and bills for the legislative branch to pass.
All right, I got my stuff here. Okay. For the judicial branch, we can elect judges and serve our duty through the legal system. We go through the legal system ourselves, and we also serve jury duty.
Okay.
For the executive, we elect the president and the vice president. And for the legislative, we also elect our own congressmen and representatives for the House of Representatives. A lot of elections going on.
Okay.
Bringing cases to the judicial branch, the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So if we think we're treated unfairly, we can bring it to the judicial branch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so we gave a lot of examples about voting, but what about how can we also participate as citizens? What are some of the other things that we could do?
Joseph wrote jury duty, and Rukshan had added, I think it missed, suggest laws and bills for legislative branch to pass.
Yep. Okay. How about I went to law school. That's a way to participate in the judicial branch. Like you can become a member of the judicial branch. Attorneys are part of that process.
We also vote to impeach the president.
Well, our representatives and senators vote to impeach him. So we would.
And we elect them. So.
Yeah, we elect them. Would any of you be interested in running for political office?
Not me.
No. I don't think that would suit me as a person.
What do you think, Anna?
No.
No? Okay.
Rukshan says maybe.
Maybe? Okay. Well, I just throw that as an example. That's one way we can get involved as well. We can run for office. We can start at the local level. We could run to be on our school board. We could run to be on our city council. We could run to be a state or state senator or representative, governor, and then all the way up to the federal branches as well. We've got, does anybody know where Amy Klobuchar went to high school? Senator Klobuchar?
Wayzata.
Wayzata. There you go. So not too far removed from any of you, right? So it was a few years ago, was sitting in a classroom at Wayzata High School here in Minnesota. So she's a senator now, and just, you know, until recently was a candidate for president. So that's a way to get involved. When you get to be an adult and you pay your taxes, one of the boxes you can check on your tax return is whether you want to donate. I think the amount is still $3, but you can elect to donate $3 per person in your household to give money to people who are running for office. So the federal government collects that money, and if somebody wants to run for office and they're not, you know, we just had Michael Bloomberg, who was running for president, and he's a multi-billionaire. So he has plenty of money, but, you know, somebody who might have good ideas and wants to run for president and, you know, isn't a billionaire might need money to run. So as a citizen, you can donate money to a fund that they can take money from in order to run ads and travel around the country talking to people. So,
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Can I suggest one that is specific to this year?
Yes.
Census.
Oh, good one. You guys know what the census is?
No.
Anybody know what the census is? Joe?
Yes is yes.
Joe says yes.
No.
Okay.
Merkshan says not really.
They count everybody who's in the country.
They do. Yep. So they ask some very, they, first of all, they want to know where everybody that's in the United States, where they live. But we'll talk about representatives and senators in just a minute. But one of the ways they determine how many representatives a state has is based on how many people live in that state, or live in a particular part of the state, to determine you know, how they're going to split up the representatives across your state. So, but they also, the census captures a lot of demographic information about race, income, how many members of the family are living in the house. So they try to get that information so that they know, as the federal government is sending money out to the states, they kind of know, based on what they're trying to achieve with the money they're sending, they know where they can get the best impact, if they know where people they're trying to help or serve are located. So that actually, the census is an obligation. You're actually required by law to complete that. And they send out the form. I just sent it in the mail. Mr. Batts, have you received yours yet?
We did. We received it earlier this week.
Yeah. So you're allowed to fill it out and send it in. If you don't do that, eventually some people come knocking at your door, and they will actually sit at your kitchen table with you and either ask you the questions or watch you fill it out and give it to them, because they want all this information. If they relied on people mailing it back in, they probably, I'd be surprised if they got half of them back. So the federal government pays people to go door to door, knock on the doors, and they will actually come into your house and watch you fill out the paperwork or ask you the questions and fill it out. Okay, so importance of checks and balances. So we talked about all the branches, and you know, the importance of how they work together is what we call the checks and balances. And that's intended to make sure that one branch doesn't have more power than the other, and doesn't do things, you know, kind of unfairly for the citizens of the United States. And I've got a couple of videos I'm going to show. I think this will work fine. The first one is a Schoolhouse Rocks video, or Schoolhouse Rocks video that that talks about how a bill is passed, and so that really talks about the legislative branch. And then the second video is a Saturday Night Live skit that makes fun of that Schoolhouse Rocks video, and talks more about how the executive branch can achieve things through executive orders. It's a pretty funny video. I will say, Scouts BSA does not condone smoking. The character playing former President Barack Obama is smoking in the video, so that's my disclaimer for that. Okay, everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Perfect. Okay, so we're getting towards the end. We'll talk about the United States Congress now, and look at our, for those of us live in Minnesota, we'll look at our representatives and senators, and then we'll talk about the other requirements for the merit badge that you will all send to me. So first, so House of Representatives is the number of representatives for a particular state is based on population as of the latest census. And Mr. Batts mentioned census earlier as a great example of how citizens can get involved in the political process. And this is the example of why filling out that census matters, because the number of representatives the state has is based on their population. And presently Minnesota has 8 representatives. But the idea behind the House of Representatives is that your representation will be based on your population, or it's often called proportional democracy, meaning if there's more people in California and New York and Texas, they get more representatives because they have more people that will be impacted by the laws as a percentage of the total population of the United States. So right now there's 435 House of Representatives members total. The next reapportionment, or the next kind of reassignment of the number of representatives will be in December 2020. So it'll be right after our next elections. So this will be the last election that we have that Minnesota is guaranteed to have 8 representatives. And whether we get 8 or maybe go up to 9 or go down to 7 will be based on the census that will be completed in December of this year. It looks like projections are based on the number of people moving out of the state and moving into other states. We may lose 1 seat, meaning we'll have less influence than we had before. And then the representatives serve 2-year terms, which can oftentimes cause concern, because just about as soon as a representative gets elected, they immediately start campaigning for their next term in office. And so they don't get to spend as much time as many think they could actually running the country, because they're too busy trying to get reelected. And then the senators, or the Senate, there's 2 senators per state. And this is intended to be, in the Constitution was intended so that every state has equal representation when it comes to the Senate. So despite the fact that California and Texas and New York are way bigger than Minnesota in terms of population, they still only get 2 senators, just like we do. And even smaller populated states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, they have the same number of senators as Minnesota does. So, and senators serve for 6-year terms. Going back to my comment about the 2-year terms for the representatives, the 6-year terms allow the senators a lot more time to actually focus on passing laws, and less time campaigning. Although, as we saw in this, in the current presidential election, and the number of candidates that the Democratic Party had, many of those were senators. So even though they have 6-year terms and can focus on passing laws as senators, many of them end up running for president. And their reelection, they focus their attention on the election rather than passing laws. So presently, our 2 senators from Minnesota are Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar. And I'll start with Senator Klobuchar. Like we talked about earlier, she was a Wayzata High School graduate. She was actually the valedictorian of her graduating class at Wayzata. She, prior to becoming a senator, was an attorney practicing law at one of the big law firms in Minnesota. And then she got involved at the state level as well before being elected as a representative for Minnesota. And then eventually she ran for Senate and was elected as a senator in 2006. I can mention here, she was a 2020 presidential candidate. And a lot of people think that Joe Biden will pick her as his vice president running mate for the 2020 presidential election if he gets the Democratic nomination, which it looks like he will. And then the other senator is Tina Smith. She was the former lieutenant governor of Minnesota. When our previous senator Al Franken resigned from the Senate in January of 2018. Our former governor, Mark Dayton, appointed Tina Smith to replace Senator Franken. And even though she was appointed, she had to run officially. So as soon as she took over as senator, she launched an election campaign, and she was reelected by the voters of Minnesota in November 2018. And interestingly enough, because that's when Senator Franken's term was, his 6-year term was set to end in 2020. So Tina Smith was appointed in January 2018. She had to immediately run again to be elected, and now she has to run again in 2020. So she spent most of her time in office having to run for her job. Then our representatives, we've got, like presently we have 8 representatives, and these are all listed. Does everybody on the call, do you know who your representative is?
Phillips.
Yes, MR.
Okay.
Dean Phillips.
Phillips?
He keeps sending me emails because I emailed him.
Okay. Rukshan and Joe, do you know who your representative is?
Joe says Dean Phillips.
Okay. Rukshan?
Roshan says Dean Phillips.
Okay, yep, that's right. So I think Reed's the only one who doesn't live in the Plymouth Wayzata area. And you said yours is Omar?
Tom Emmer.
Oh, you have Emmer. I'm sorry. Okay. Tom Emmer. Okay. And we have Ilhan Omar represents the district that Minneapolis and St. Paul are part of. She's in the news quite often as a vocal opponent of President Trump. She was the first Muslim American elected as a representative. And a couple things, since many of you have Dean Phillips as your representative, this is his first term as a representative. Prior to him becoming representative, Eric Paulson was our former representative. And personally, when I was working for the IRS, I was living out in Washington, D.C. for a few months, and my family came to visit, and we set up a visit with Representative Paulson, and went to his office, and he showed us around and gave us a tour of the U.S. Capitol building. And before my family came out to visit, I had sent in a request to Senators Klobuchar and Franken, trying to get a tour of the White House set up, and neither one of them responded. And during our tour of the Capitol, when Representative Paulson was with us, he found out that I didn't have a White House tour lined up, and he came and he met me and my family at 6:30 a.m. to get in line at the White House, and personally walked us in to the tour, which they're allowed to do as representatives. And so that's just an example of, if you reach out to your representative, and we'll talk about the letters you wrote, They really care about their constituents in many cases, and will do things to help you out. So that was an example of him helping me and my family to get a tour of the White House. So don't ever hesitate to write letters, send emails, make phone calls, because your representatives do want to hear from you. They have to run for office every 2 years, and in many cases, they need every vote they can get, and they'll do stuff like that for you. Okay, so now merit badge completion, and I'll pull up another slide here in just a second to talk about the things that you need. I can email this information out to everybody that participated today. Or Mr. Batts, are you planning to send a follow-up? Should I send this to you and you'll send it to all the, how should we do this?
Either way works.
Okay. Well, I'll send it out since it's my information. I'll send this piece of information out to all of you. But the expectation is that you will all mail me your completed workbook, your blue card, and make sure you fill out your blue card with all of your information. And a lot of the requirements you'll get credit for just for having participated in today's class. The rest of the requirements will be included in your workbook. And I will need a copy of the letter that you have sent or plan to send to your senator or representative. And that letter should address an issue that's important to you or your family that you would like them to pass a law on, or if there's a law that's already being considered, how you'd like them to vote on that. In the past, students of my merit badge classes have written letters about school gun violence. They've written stuff about immigration. They've written stuff about environmental laws that they'd like to see passed, cleaner air emissions, or if you have thoughts on global warming or climate change, you can write about that. If there's
Jim, real quick, Rukshan wrote that he only has the response because it wouldn't let him print out his own email.
That's okay. Send me the response. Yeah, and in your but also Rukshan, put in your workbook the topic that you wrote about and what you wanted them to do. So if you write about coronavirus, or you write about gun control, or you write about climate change, just tell me what your topic was and what you asked them to do. So, and then if you have any questions, I will also include my cell phone and my email address. The only thing I ask is if you text me or you call me or you email me, that you include your parent on that email. Or include, I think for those of you in the boys troop 283, I think you have Mr. Smith's contact information. If you would include him in the text or the email, or a parent, either one. And then for those of you in the girls troop, if you would include your parent or Mr. Holland or Mr. Ball, your committee chair, or some other member of your troop. That's just for youth protection. We have too deep leadership, and we don't have personal communication between adults and scouts on a one-to-one level. So I ask that you include another adult in that discussion. And if you don't, I will reply immediately, and I will include your parent or one of the other adults in my reply to you. And I will note that that I received individual contact from you. Okay. So this is intended for my Toro Merit Badge Day presentation. So that's our logo. I'm going to go back out here, and I'm going to pull up a different document real quick before we finish. And we'll go through what the requirements are, and you can ask me any questions you might have. Okay, so requirement number 1, explain what citizenship in the nation means and what it takes to be a good citizen of this country. Discuss the rights, duties, and obligations of a responsible and active citizen. We covered all of that with today's presentation. The next one, requirement number 2, and this is where you'll have to send me some stuff in your workbook. You have to do 2 of the following. You have to visit a place that's listed as a National Historic Landmark or that is on the National Register of Historic Places. And the document that I sent out for the pre-work had that, the listing of what those places were. And you need to tell me what you learned about that landmark or site and what you found interesting about it. You can tour your state capitol building or the U.S. Capitol. Tell me about what you learned as part of that visit. You can tour a federal facility. Explain to me what you saw there and what you learned about its function in the local community and how it serves the nation. You can choose a national monument that interests you, and you don't have to visit it. You can use books or brochures or the internet or any other resources to find out more about that monument. So, for example, Mount Rushmore, if you went to the U.S. Mint building, any other national monument, Fort Snelling is an example here locally. And again, tell me what you learned and explain why the monument's important to you and also to our country's citizens. Watch the national evening news for so one of those, you have to do two of those. And
I only did one, but I just did the second one, so it's not on the copy I sent you.
Okay, so send me a new copy, finish it up, send it to me.
Okay.
That way we can finalize it. And an important note here is it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do it after today or as part of this merit badge, as long as it's something you've done or researched or place you've visited since you've been a scout, since you've been in Scouts BSA, whether it's a girls troop or boys troop. Time at as a Cub Scout does not count. So it has to start once you crossed over and became part of the boys troop or the girls troop. Okay, requirement number 3 is to watch the national evening news for 5 days in a row or read your daily newspaper for 5 days in a row and discuss some of the national issues you learned about. You can just pick one issue and explain how it affects you and your family. I don't think anybody today has to go very far to come up with a topic that's really affecting you and your family. I would expect that many of you are going to write about what's going on with coronavirus or COVID-19. But that should be listed in your workbook. You can just write what you need to write in the workbook. And then number 4 requirement is discuss each of the following documents with your counselor. We've already done that. You guys all came very prepared. So thank you for that. You don't need to do anything more with requirement number 4 if you participated in today's class, which you all did. Number 5 is list of 6 functions of government as noted in the preamble to the Constitution. Discuss with your counselor. We did that today. So you don't need to do anything for number 5. Then number 6 is one you do have to do, and you can put it in your workbook. You can choose a speech. You don't need my approval. It says with your counselor's approval, but just pick a historic speech. Examples or speeches given by President Lincoln. The Emancipation Proclamation is one example. President Roosevelt, President Kennedy, his "I Have a Dream" speech was a good example. President Reagan in his speech at the Berlin Wall, asking the Soviet Union to tear down the wall. That's a good example. It could be examples from community leaders. For example, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. But these are just examples. So pick a speech that's meaningful to you and write about that in your workbook. Explain the importance of the speech. Choose a sentence or two from the speech that has significant meaning to you and tell me why it's significant. Requirement number 7 is discuss the 3 branches of federal government. We did that today. And number 8 is name your 2 senators and members of Congress, the representatives. We discussed that today. But then the requirement that you still have to follow up with me on is to either send me a copy of the letter that you sent to it has to be to your representative or your senator. It can't be to a local official like a mayor or to the governor of the state of Minnesota or one of your state representatives. It has to be to Senator Smith or Klobuchar or to your representative. It could be a different representative, from Minnesota. If Phillips is your representative and you prefer to send something to Emmer or Omar or somebody that may be more politically aligned with you or your family's political leanings, you can send it to one of them as well. But it does need to be a federal representative or senator. If you did what Rukshan has done, and you do it online, you can just in your workbook tell me what you wrote about and what your position was on the issue, and then give me a copy of the confirmation email showing that or confirmation, either email or the screenshot of the screen when you submit the comment to them. You can send that to me. So just real quick review. The follow-up work you need to do is number 2. Do 2 of those things. Describe them in your workbook. Number 3, which is the national news for 5 days, and write about that in your workbook. Then number 6, which is the important speech or historical speech, write about that in your workbook. And then number 8, the letter that you sent to your senator or representative. So that's the follow-up work. Make sure you send that to me with your completed workbook and with your blue card, and make sure that you have your address on the envelope so I know where to send it back to. Any questions?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I think I'm good too.
Okay. Those of you that don't have a microphone, if you could, or something in the text chat, letting me know that you're good with that.
I'm good.
Okay.
Joe says he's good. Rukshan says he's good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.